All right, so Justin talked for a long time. So we're basically to the point where we said we'd be done with the content. So if anyone wants to, get up and leave, we won't be offended. But I think we did say that we'd have a short panel and have some Q&A. So if I can get Justin and Kevin here from the Polymer team and Diego from Salesforce, we will take questions for a bit, as long as you have questions to ask. And there's a mic that will be going out into the audience for anyone who wants to ask a question. Does anyone have any questions? Here, mic on the way.
First of all, thank you very much. I appreciate the talk. I guess I hope I didn't miss it, but so like for instance, where I work right now, we have a team that's been using web components, and we've been able to like import them and use them, but I'm trying to like get into their children of like the component that they have, and I've just been like struggling with that. So like I just abandoned it really, and I just would like to.
Are you referring to styling basically?
Yeah, exactly. Like I see all the different ways, and I'm just like trying to like I understand I can get the custom element and reference it, but to dig down and dig deeper, like I hope I didn't miss it or.
Yeah, I mean, I was going really fast, so it's like easy for it to fly by. I mean, the biggest thing is if you're going in JavaScript, the shadow root's available as a property. You can get in there and get into the shadow root and query that, and then get into other shadow roots. It's dangerous. I mean, if you're building all the components yourselves, what I'd say is figure out a way to more like publish the subcomponents you need to access rather than dig in and get to them. For styling, there are some walls still up, and I think that's why I mentioned the user land styling available, is that basically, providing styling down through the tree as properties or putting it somewhere in a map globally is a totally acceptable thing to do for now until we get the additional features for Shadow DOM.
Okay, so it'd just be kind of best to just work with that team closely and try to kind of work through those kinks and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, do what you have to get the job done.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks.
I mean, it's funny. It always kind of feels a little bit like a loss or something. We're adding Shadow DOM, we're adding encapsulation. We lost all that power that we used to have. But another way to flip it around, and this is one thing that we're contending with at Google in this collaboration that we have with Material, is that we have thousands and thousands of engineers that have used Material components across Google. And all of them had really good reasons for needing to kind of reach through a bunch of components and style them, to the point that now the actual stylable API of those components is completely unknown. It's unknowable. Like so much, going around the side has happened that the API is unknowable. And if we think of like in Java when we're composing classes, right? I made a class A, and inside and its internal implementation details in its private area use class B. It would be kind of like this transition we're having in CSS where we now have scoping is kind of like where, in Java, if we said, yeah, but I really want to like twiddle with, class A's, instance of class B in there, you wouldn't just like reach in and do it, right? You'd be forced to go talk to that developer of class B and have them give you an API that is usable and forward that out. And that sort of collaboration, although it feels like a loss because we're coming from this Wild West of being able to do anything you want with styling on a page, at a certain scale, you have to have that in order to be able to, maintain code. And that's something that we're starting to, bit by bit, through this collaboration with the Material group, start making, real inroads in the maintainability of things. Because as soon as we want to, the owner of Class B wants to change something, make it better, being able to know the actual API of that is important. So that's like a very ivory tower, I think, way to look at it. Obviously, like the troops on the ground have to like get the jobs done, and so I think you kind of have to, one, try and have that collaboration. Have people think about their styling API as an API that is a contract between them. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to use the tools that are available, and the new things that Justin talked about are going to help with that.
All right, do we have another question?
Hey, so my name's Andy, and one of my coworkers has a question. So he prototyped a component in Web Components, loves it, but like you said, we have to work with the tools we have. The Reddit code base is really heavily React-based these days. So, you know, Polymer looks great, LWC looks great, but if we want to try and hybridize, are we setting ourselves up for trouble, or have you seen successful approaches to combining web components into a React-based app?
So I can speak some of the experience, like, because at Salesforce, that's a lot of what we do. Like, customer has some apps running on Angular or React or what have you. So as I think you touched on it, right? Like, integrating web components into another framework is actually fairly easy, right? There are some caveats. For example, like React might have some specific binding that you have to do, but in general, like, web components fit really well with any other framework. Like, in fact, a lot of our customers have Angular or Vue, and literally you drop a component and it works, right? Most of the stuff works. So the integration to other frameworks is great. The other way around, it's a little bit tricky, but also possible. I don't know if you guys want to add something to it.
React has a kind of well-known limitation with web components, but I want to clarify because it's usually not as big of a deal as it's made to seem, is that you know, React basically treats lowercase tag names very differently from uppercase tag names in JSX, right? And lowercase tag names it treats as DOM elements, and when you put a binding on one of those, a attribute or property-looking binding in React, it always sets an attribute, basically. And so this means it's very difficult to pass complex data down through the tree into a web component. This ends up usually not being a big deal in practice because, like, a lot of components don't need complex data passed into them if it's like from a design system. Like, the button just needs some text. That works fine. And the other thing is that it's not actually that well known that it's pretty trivial to write a wrapper on a web component that says, when you see the foo property, set the foo property on the component, not the foo attribute. So yeah, React has this one little caveat, but in general, the entire reason why web components were made is so that they can fit into other frameworks.
And the React core team has said that they actually intend to address this in their next major release. It is a breaking change for them, so they're holding it for the next major release. But they are, they've stated that they're on board with making web component interop more seamless.
So this is it's kind of a tricky one to ask for me. Like, my team has started building building our own web components. We're using Lit and using them inside of our own app. But there's some of them where we want to also host them, like, publicly so that other people can use them. And I just haven't found or read a lot. I mean, maybe I missed it on, like, how the heck do you like in GitHub, just like as a development and a coding and a deployment process, like, how y'all, like, the Google team seems to actually have a lot of, like, well hosted, like, everything's in its own little Git repo, and that seems really cool. But, like, how are you doing that on the back end, right? Like, what's the development process, and then how do all those pieces go together? Like, can you like refer me to any sort of, like, documentation or anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, so traditionally, I mean, in the kind of old days of Polymer, we distributed everything on Bower, and that had a strict one-to-one relationship between GitHub repos and Bower packages, and so that sort of was one of the driving reasons for why we structured that. In our more recent development, we've moved to doing kind of mono-repo style development. So if you look at our material web components development that's ongoing, that's in a mono-repo that's managed with Lerna. If you're familiar with that. So that allows one GitHub repo to have a bunch of components that all kind of can interdepend or depend on base class. But, you know, you can have a whole suite of packages that work together and can be tested together on CI. But then at deploy time, you can deploy them to individual NPM packages so they can be consumed granularly by developers. So that's kind of the model that we're going to. That I think is, you know, pretty typical for this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where we have lots of sort of opinions and best practices that haven't, frankly, not yet been documented or codified in a product. And I think that's something that, as time goes forward, we, you know, hope to help the ecosystem work through a lot of the types of questions that you're talking about. And it's a matter of prioritization and resources and time. But certainly feel free to hop on the Polymer Slack, and if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Hi. So one thing I was kind of wondering is we've been working on our product and we're using web components all the way. Like the whole thing's in web components. It's been for a couple years. But part of it is we kind of have to keep chasing whatever new is coming out. We started in Polymer 1, then we moved everything to Polymer 2, then we moved everything to Polymer 3. That was not fun. And while we know, yeah, it's a component, they can all kind of live together. We're actually moving to lit now, and we have Polymer 3 components and lit components living together. The fact that we're kind of like, we always got to keep chasing the new standard because what if they stop supporting the old one? What do we do? Is kind of got us a little scared, and our executives ask us all the time, guys, why do y'all keep having to convert stuff? Like, you're wasting time. You could be doing other things. So do y'all feel like that lit and lit element is really the place that y'all want to be and is going to be for the long term? Or are we going to keep doing this, y'all?
I love that question, actually. So Polymer 3 is like the answer to that question in a way, not because Polymer 3 is the point to like land on, but because Polymer 3 is kind of a version of Polymer that is scoped because of JS modules. It's not kind of attached to a global name that can easily live with other potential future versions of Polymer that actually never happened, like Polymer 3 and 4 could have lived side by side because they're in modules, or lit element, like you noticed, right? So Polymer 1 and 2 lived on a global namespace. Polymer 1 was on an old version of the specs, which hopefully is never going to happen again. I mean, that's like a very rare occurrence, right? So we've had a number of different changes that, like, you know, never should happen again. But you'll notice we got to this place with Polymer 3 and 4, and you said they live side by side on the same page. The lit element doesn't have to be the final destination anymore, right? We can come out with a newer, better thing if something exists, you know, in a few years that we want to move to, and you could incrementally adopt it or not adopt it at all. And that's the promise of web components. Like, you know, Polymer 1 and 2 were kind of a little too close to what you would see with traditional frameworks, like Angular and Ember and React or whatever, where you had to upgrade the whole page at once, right? Polymer 3 and lit element are more like, okay, just upgrade each individual element one at a time.
Yeah.
And that's the answer.
Awesome, thank you.
Just one more thing. So, first of all, thank you. And we're sorry, and we didn't mean to create as much churn as we did. Yes, we know. And I was just going to say, just really quickly, I mean, Polymer 1 at this point is quite old, and again, we're trying to kind of deprecate it because it is based on older specs. So we are definitely encouraging people, if they have really old Polymer 1 stuff, to migrate. The newer stuff, at that point, I mean, we have tons of Google projects using Polymer that are going to be supported for a long time to come. I think you can depend on that. And we'll try to slow down.
Yeah, just to reiterate kind of what Justin said, I think, well, again, I think the V0 specs only shipping in Chrome, that was sort of a, hopefully an anomaly. We're now to a very, you know, what we consider a pretty standard spec base, and everything that's being added is additive. It's not changing out from under us. So that's the first thing. But the other thing that you know, I think Justin touched on is, you know, the fact that we're using standards and using the platform doesn't mean that there's going to be one final library in user land that uses those specs that you're going to land on. But really what it means is that there should never be, from here, you know, as you're seeing with Polymer 3 to lit, there should never be a step change now where you have to change everything at once. And think about that. Like, really think about that. Like, what framework are you using out there today that you could go from, like, a major version, you know, 1 to 2 on just one component in the page and have the rest of it still working? And that's really what we intended, what we set out to do with web components, is make these, the implementation details of a web component actually the implementation details, so that you can mix and match them, so that a Polymer 3 element and a lit element and an Ionic element and a Lightning web component can all live on the same page, because to the browser, to the user, they're just HTML elements, right? So this is what we set out to do. We know that it took a couple bumps to get there, but we do think that we're kind of positioned for that reality to be true.
So I'm actually not, I would consider myself a bad poor quality developer, but I build solutions. And I love Polymer 1 because I was able to get a bunch of stuff and put it around, and I had an app running. Now, as we move to lit HTML, right, I am kind of missing a lot of those things, and they are not available. So question is, should I use lit HTML, or should I use Lightning, which has got a bunch of drag and drop stuff? Which way should I go is one question. And second part question is to Lightning, a million components. I thought components were about reusability. So what's going on in the enterprise world?
So to the latter question, we have a lot of developers, right? Like the million is because in total we have 5 million something registered developers, and million is mean like maybe I create a component and I throw it to the trash. So like a million is the amount of components that have been created on the platform. Certainly, yes, you don't want to create a million components on your page. Unfortunately, our pages are really complex. So I think the amount of components is not necessarily a good or bad metric. As to, I mean, I think every framework has different goals, and both frameworks are equally good, right? And it basically is what fits your use case, what makes sense for you, right? If you want this drag and drop stuff, that's more for our customers that are declarative building, right? You have to be in the platform for that, right? So it really depends on your goals, right? Like if you want to basically working on something that we will by SLA guarantee you that it's going to work in 10 years, then probably it's a good place to be. But all of them, we are all working toward the same goal, which is like making better APIs and making just abstraction on top of the platform.
And I do want to acknowledge that in the shift, especially from Polymer 2 through to lit element, we did change our style of development a lot, from an HTML-centric style to a JavaScript-centric style. And so we know we kind of lost some usability for the people who preferred the HTML style, which is unfortunate. I mean, we kind of had to move towards what was mainstream, because most of our developers wanted a kind of React-like experience and wanted kind of like low overhead and to make as lightweight a components as possible. The promise here is that you should be able to find a library that gives you that Polymer 2 style of development with HTML templates. I wish I could name, more off the top of my head, but I know there are some out there, and it's possible we'll get back into that area. But the promise of web components is you should be able to choose the library that suits your style.
Hello. So server-side rendering, that sounded exciting. We ended up using web components arguably too much, too widely, and wrong on our website early on, and that bit us both performance and SEO-wise. So we ended up kind of doing a lot of workarounds and then eventually just kind of removing all the shadow routes just to kind of because we wanted people to find our website, essentially. So would you just want to, as much as you can, let us know a little bit about your plans for server-side rendering? I assume there will be some sort of server part of that required, and basically,
so
give us the scoop.
Yeah, so just before adjusting, so all of the websites that you saw, like for example, the communities in the Adidas, that is a heavy B2C. We need to be server-side rendering some pieces, right? So we have meetings every other week, both Salesforce and the lead team and the Polymer team, to actually solve it, right? And so we have each implementations that kind of work, but we really want to have something that works for everybody, right? So that's something that we're working on it. So I believe, hopefully, you will see something soon, either from both sides or either side or both sides at the same time. But yeah, something that we're working really on the top priority, at least from our side as well.
Yeah, it is a top priority for us. So I mean, to give you the inside scoop, a bit, like we are working on server-side rendering. Right now, we're working on a system that works with Google's internal server-side rendering, which is just quite a bit different. It doesn't run in Node. And we also have code, that works to some degree for server-side rendering lit element in Node. It doesn't do like full rehydration yet. We haven't really reviewed and opened the code. I should probably try to do that as soon as possible. But the goal is to design a system where any web component library can kind of plug into the server renderer. And so it's all possible. We just have some work, and we kind of have to agree on some formats for like rendering shadow DOM and rehydrating that.
Yeah, and we should actually mention that Ionic, with their stencil tool chain, has actually done some very impressive pioneering work in server-side rendering. And so ultimately, what we think is best for the platform and for the ecosystem is if we do have sort of a universal kind of agreed upon approach to server-side rendering web components that can support different web component base classes and different renderers. We think that's the nirvana, and as Diego said, we're meeting with them regularly. One of the things that's most exciting to me about this next era of web components is that whereas for many years it was kind of Google and the Polymer team, really carrying the torch, it's awesome that there are people like Salesforce and Ionic and that whole slew of other folks, working on this stuff. And one of the, things that really distinguishes the future era from the past era for me is that we're going to be really actively looking to nurture partnerships with all of these other web component stakeholders. And I think server-side rendering is one of the areas where definitely, as we're approaching it on the Polymer team, we're doing it in a way that is contemplating collaboration with all these other vendors of web components, tools, and libraries.
That's maybe a good opportunity to give a plug too. So if anyone's sitting out here and doing some awesome work at your company, around web components, around any of these kind of challenges, and you've come up with some novel solutions, and you're interested in giving a talk at Web Components SF, we're going to be doing these more regularly. So we have a Twitter account, Web Components SF, I think, right? So you can message us there and pitch us a talk idea, and we'd love to get a lot more of the community involved in kind of sharing these ideas.
All right, and we can maybe take a couple more questions. Do we have anything else?
Yeah, one of the things that definitely drew me towards building stuff with web components, and especially when Polymer 3 came out, is the real adoption of like the 1.0 standard in the browser and really started walking towards standards. So the thing that's also interesting about listening to you guys talk right now is like between like lit element, between like the lit element supporting library, what Salesforce is doing, what Stencil is doing, that's a whole lot of sugar code on top of the standard, right? So looking at things like lit element, in my brain, I'm hoping that it's a library that's going to continue to get smaller and go away as the browsers get better. So is that the actual intent of something like that? And how are you guys actually working with the W3C? So the syntactic sugar of making components with lit element would be the way we actually make components.
So this is our goal too, to some extent. I think right now we're still in a mode where we're still trying to uncover and implement basic capabilities that we need, like cross shadow DOM theming, scoped custom element registries, things like that. And so lit element does provide mostly sugar and some scheduling. As the browser adds a scheduler and maybe the template instantiation proposal, and maybe some more things around CSS modules and whatnot, you're going to start to see that melt away. I'm not sure that the sugar or the glue code will ever 100% go away. Maybe for some people it will, because they're just like, I know all the specs, I know all the standards, and I'm going to write this thing once and reuse it a million times, so who cares? But I think there'll always be room for a little bit of opinion and hand-holding. So.
Yeah, I think to add to Justin's, I think the goal is for a runtime everything to disappear, right? So runtime should be all vanilla. Now, as you saw, that sugar, right, that ergonomics is really, really valuable, right? For example, the way in our framework has some decorators that basically declaratively allow you to express on data, right? So that is really huge for customers, right? So that is something that the first from lead and us, and it does not necessarily good or bad, it's just the syntactic sugar that we decided to implement. And those things are things that we're gonna transpile and compile away, and they're gonna be all native, but those are the features that maybe you wanna use from some framework or some reuse for, or pieces that you're gonna, but yeah, so I think the format on which you write is not gonna disappear. So lead is gonna have his format, and Stencil is gonna have his format, and we will have his format. The goal eventually is full interoperability and full, like, zero cost, right? What you ship to the browser is as bare metal as you can make it. And so that is, in my mind, what we all kind of strive to do, which is remove the runtime piece. So there's no JavaScript framework. It's just the compilation step of your component. And I believe everyone is kind of striving that, but yeah, I think the ergonomics of that might be different.
One more thing real quick. There's just a tension between high-level ease-of-use features, which ultimately the platform would have to have more of for something like lit element to be able to go away, and expressibility, right? And especially just kind of going back to the server-side rendering question, way back when the Polymer project started, we actually had a totally declarative custom element. And it was like, it was going to be awesome, and it was going to just be native potentially, and would have been great because you wouldn't have needed a server-side render, and potentially, maybe search engines could just deal with it, right? But we realized really quickly that it was just like, there was not enough expressiveness there. We didn't know enough of the problems yet. I think stepping back and letting the core platform be low level lets us really understand the problem space better. And then when we make the abstractions, hopefully we won't get another V0 specs again, So, I mean, we all want that, I think. We want, the platform to have high level, really useful features, but it's just hard. So we're getting there, but we're going kind of deliberately and carefully.
Working directly with the W3C, or is that, okay,
Yeah.
You guys, okay.
Yeah, totally.
Very cool.
Any more questions? I think we're almost done. We're almost to 8 o'clock. We can probably take one or two more if there are. Otherwise, we will let you all head home. All right. Well, thank you very much. It has been great to see this many faces out here for the first ever Web Components and Stuff meetup.